Good afternoon, everybody, and to those of you watching on AOC, welcome into our October meeting. And today is our political preview special, or our election preview special. Of course, we're taping on the Monday before the primary election in the 2015 Louisiana races, both statewide and parish races. Lots of items on the ballot, propositions, candidates running for office, and all of the like. Today we're going to try and muddle through or clear up some of the muddied water that this campaign has given us. And with us we have two experts on politics, both local and state. To my left, Dr. Pearson Cross from the University of Louisiana, Lafayette. What is your exact title now? I know you're no longer the department chair in the political science department. You've moved on up.
Yeah, no one knows. I am Associate Dean of College of Liberal Arts, and I am Interim Department Head of Criminal Justice, and I'm an Associate Professor in the Department of Political Science.
When are you going to run for office?
That's never going to happen.
And to his left is Jeremy Alford, the editor-in-chief of LAPolitics.com, and I like to reference him as the guy who's keeping John McGinnis's flame alive in the state of Louisiana and keeping that wonderful record of political journalism alive. And for that, personally, I thank you, sir. And we'll go ahead, we'll start off with opening statements, just anything that catches your eye about the election. What makes this different from others, what makes it similar, and what makes this one particularly pop or stand out? Jeremy, I'll start with you.
Well, I think this election season turned from quiet to weird in a very short order. It's probably one of the stranger election seasons we've seen. I knew it was going to be kooky when former state representative Damon Baldone tried to register as both a Democrat and a Republican at the same time. The registrar, of course, wouldn't allow that, and he sued in court to become the first hybrid candidate in Louisiana. All that trouble, and he didn't even qualify. We got a race up in Dry Creek with a man named Biscuit running against a woman named Dorothy Sue. That's only in a Louisiana race. There's a guy named Chicken Commander running up in Shreveport. We got a guy named Tinoon running in Alexandria. And a man named Bones who dropped out in Baton Rouge. Vance McAllister, after being caught kissing a married aide on camera, decided to run for the state senate. Ashley Madison captured all of our attentions. David Vitter's serious sin is grabbing more TV than some of the other candidates in the race. I don't think we have much of a choice but to embrace the craziness, maybe buy it a cocktail and just realize that this is our political reality for right now. Some of the big takeaways for this cycle for me is super PACs. You know, this is the first time in the very long history of Louisiana politics that super PACs have played in state level elections, and they're playing a very large role. These are political action committees that can raise unlimited amounts of money, thanks to a Supreme Court decision that likened cash to free speech. Of all the money that's been raised in the governor's race, roughly 40% has come from super PACs, so they're having a huge impact. It is going to change the landscape of politics statewide for generations to come. Meanwhile, we have candidates on the statewide level who are no longer engaging in the retail politics that we all know as our Louisiana politics. The days of going to fairs and festivals, eating alligator on a stick and kissing babies are being replaced slowly by data and metrics that can tell you, look, you need to be in this neighborhood, and not only that, you need to knock on these doors. Don't worry about everybody else. I think an undercurrent that's going to be a big story after this election cycle is the lack of voter interest and engagement. There were 101,050 races on the October 24th ballot. Of those, 46% have already been decided due to a lack of challengers. These are races with unopposed candidates. It's the largest list of unopposed candidates we've seen in recent history. It's even more telling than the legislature. 51% of the legislature is ready to be sworn in today. To put that in perspective, if everyone unopposed in the Senate voted together and everyone unopposed in the House voted together, they would be able to block every single bill on the Senate side and block a 2/3 majority vote on the House side. They would control the entire Louisiana legislature, all without one vote or any kind of mandate from the people they represented. We learned that early voting ended. It's down 10% compared to last November. African American participation is down 25%. You're probably looking at a turnout based on several different analyses between maybe 42 and 50. Secretary of State Tom Scheller is saying 46, 47. Others are saying way lower. I wouldn't be surprised. We probably have dimmer prospects for the runoff, I would imagine. So I don't know if folks are we burned out on Louisiana politics in a state that lived that has a political culture that lives in the imagination of the rest of the country? I think maybe so. But is it that people aren't interested in Louisiana politics, or are they choosing to ignore it? I mean, we went right from a sometimes spiteful U.S. Senate race right into a gubernatorial election after 8 years of presidential ambitions from a governor and a series of sessions with that were high on drama. And then, you know, voters may need to take a collective breath, but it's not going to happen. We're going to go straight from the runoff into the transition period, into the inauguration, into a series of legislative sessions with Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's Eve, Mardi Gras, and Easter in between. By the time we hit that point, it's time for the presidential election, what promises to be a very peppery U.S. Senate contest for the seat that David Vitter holds now, and maybe 2 open congressional seats, including one here in Lafayette. So I think that this is an election cycle that's going to change Louisiana politics for generations to come. I think a lot of us don't realize it yet, but when we look back on 2014, 2015, even 2016, we'll see the high political watermark where things changed. And I think that's happening right now.
Dr. Cross?
I just want to know if I can use that for my speech to the Rotary in a week or two. That was great, and I'm impressed. I just want to pick up on a couple of points. Certainly, there may be apathy elsewhere in Louisiana, but in terms of Lafayette Parish, this, of course, is one of the most exciting races that we've had in quite a while, because for really the first time we have a sheriff's race that's very contested with 4 quality candidates, and we have the city parish president's race, which we haven't seen a really contest like this in quite a while. So we've got some stuff over here that's occupying us, and I think it's been, for me, a new experience since I've been here in Lafayette Parish. We haven't really seen that. But I want to pick up, really just kind of add to some of your comments, since you did such a great job of kind of laying out the whole scene. There's an apathy we noted really with the turnout in terms of, as Jeremy mentioned, in terms of early voting and what predictions are for turnout, African American voting, and so on. But I'd say this apathy goes back a little farther. I mean, if you go back to, this is a post-Katrina phenomenon, because if you go back to President Jindal, see, I'm getting ahead of myself. Governor Jindal's first run for office, 2003, we had what I would say would be a fairly normal Louisiana election. 2007, Jindal got elected with 600 and some thousand votes, and that's way down. Total votes cast in that election, I think, was under 1 million.
37% turnout.
37% turnout, very low. And then we saw it again in 2007. No competition, very low voter turnout. I think was even lower in that election. And then this election, here we have this quality field for the gubernatorial candidate, 4 strong candidates, each of whom raised a considerable amount of money and are articulating viewpoints fairly well. And again, not much voter interest, and we're anticipating, a turnout in somewhere in the range below 50% is what I'm anticipating, frankly. And so I'm not sure that we are looking at this election, where I might disagree with you a little bit, is whether or not this election is the one that we're going to look back. I think we might look back and say a few elections ago we kind of may hit a turning point in Louisiana politics, and this is kind of a continuation of the lack of turnout to this point. One of the things that I think has had this effect, there are 2 things that I think have had this effect. One is that Jindal came in, promising bright and shiny, promising a new day in 2007, and we've all been kind of disillusioned, I think, by the reality of kind of what's happened with the budget and with other parts of that package, and I think that's kind of spilled over. What's spilling over into this current race, I think, is the miasma that's circulating around the front runner having such serious questions about probity and about rectitude. But I'm referring, of course, to the scandal of 2007. So when you have a front runner that is kind of infected by this spell of, there's this disrepute kind of circulating around the front runner, kind of brings down the whole election cycle. The race for governor, of course, is the preeminent race in Louisiana politics and is the marquee race, and some would say the only race that really counts, or that people really pay close attention to. But when you have a front runner or a putative front runner who is kind of wounded the way that David Vitter is wounded in people's imagination, I think it has kind of a depressing effect on the election cycle as a whole. You know, we don't have shiny dreams about Senator Vitter taking over as governor. We may think, oh, well, he'll get something done, or one of the other people running, but it kind of takes the shine off of a new, hope-filled future, you know? So this may be adding to this kind of malaise, perhaps, that we're seeing in voter turnout figures. Also, there's no African-American, person leading here really strongly, other than some local races. And so African-Americans, as we saw in the pre-voting period, the early election period, are 27% was a figure that I saw in terms of making up total electorate. Of course, that's considerably below where we've seen it before. It reached a high water mark, I think, in 33% at one point of total electorate. So this is an election where African Americans will play less of a role than in past elections. So that's what
You mentioned the malaise and the lack of voter turnout, or I should say the projected lack of voter turnout and the apathy. Part of me wonders if it does go back to what you mentioned with the sad state of affairs the state is in right now with regards to the budget and some of the other holes that were left by Governor Jindal in the legislature. Arguably maybe the worst state since 1991 when Buddy Roemer was running for re-election against Edwin Edwards. But also, part of me thinks it might have to do with the negative campaigning and with all the attack ads and the mudslinging, especially here in Lafayette Parish with the sheriff's race and to an extent the city parish presidency race. Does that lead to voter burnout? In your opinion, is that part of the reason why we're seeing more people shy away from this? Are they just burned out on the cycle?
Well, people don't like negative advertising. They think it's nasty and they think it's dirty, but quite frankly, it works. It's a tried and true method. I thought it's interesting though that here lately we're starting to see some of the gubernatorial candidates go warm and fuzzy. I think it's maybe just a short break from the action. We saw John Bell Edwards, who's largely been positive this cycle, with a ad about the honor code in West Point. We saw Jay Darden in it with a spot that was, no edits, one take, looking straight at the camera, reminiscent of Buddy Roemer in '87, with a positive message. Although he's gone quickly to attacking David Vitter in his latest ad, and even David Vitter had an ad featuring Wendy Vitter that more or less reintroduces the children and the family to Louisiana voters. But the super PACs have certainly changed the tone. I mean, they can go negative and allow the candidates they're supporting to have a degree of separation. To say, well, look, that's not me, those are the super PACs. It's illegal for us to coordinate on strategy. But I think at the end of the day that voters it's wearing thin on voters, which is why I think we did see a quick turn to these positive spotlight candidates.
Dr. Cross?
I think you covered it.
Going back to David Vitter with Saturday's revelation from the American Zombie blog about the New Orleans prostitute Wendy Ellis coming out with new claims about Vitter fathering a child with her. Those claims, of course, for those of you who may have missed the news, late last night, early this morning, WDSU out of New Orleans and a couple of other outlets reported that there may be some holes to her claims. But even if there are holes in that claim, does Saturday's revelations, no matter how true they may be, does that put David Vitter in an even tougher position? Simply put, how screwed is David Vitter?
Well, not any more than he already was. I mean, this is these claims seem to be pretty, from what I've heard, seem to be fairly compromised by the messing up the facts and so on. And I mean, this is a scandal that's kind of had its day, and people, I hesitate to say that it's going to be a determining factor in this election. I don't think it's going to be. I think, given the nonpartisan primary system that we have, David Vitter doesn't need to be everybody's favorite going into this, this coming Saturday's election, right? He just needs to be in the top two, and by the time the choice is going to be made, first of all, it's not going to affect those people who are devoted partisans or think he's the best person. And that's enough to put him in the runoff, in my view. And then in the second round, that's when other factors come into play, and I don't think this particular scandal is going to play out there either. I do think there's some difference between running for a state office versus a federal office, and I think this was less important for federal office than in a state where you would say, well, it's where our families live, it's where we go to church and raise our kids. But that being said, I see it as, unless we get something real substantive, and unless the news organizations like those in this room start covering it on the basis of new information, I think it's a dead horse.
I thought I think it's somewhat irresponsible to get into the details of the videos that released this weekend, because really all you have is an individual on tape with no hard evidence. 2 news publications have covered it since they came out. One ended up having to pull down the story, and the other one had to end up significantly amending its piece, because there's a paper trail of court documents that poke holes in the story, show a conflicting timeline. But David Vitter has a base of support that you're just not going to shake off with a stick. I've seen polls where they throw everything but the kitchen sink at David Vitter, accusing him of breaking the law, of stepping out on his marriage, and he still clings to 20-21%. I think that's his floor in this primary. I've convinced myself of that. And these are folks that you can light on fire, and they're still going to make it to the voting booth to vote for David Vitter. They are convinced that no matter what has happened in the past or what will happen in the future, that he will be a consistent supporter of the pro-life movement, on the Christian right, that he's going to be there. So if the polling trends do play out, and we do see David Vitter trailing John Bel Edwards in the primary vote and going to the runoff, it's going to be fascinating to see what happens. And I would be hesitant to give it to either one of them right now.
It'll be interesting to see where that 36 to 38% undecided, depending on which poll you look at, where they're going to fall, because that's going to make a difference in this election as well.
Yeah, usually the undecided starts to fall as we get closer to the election, but we've seen it kind of creep up. We saw it jump from 18 in the Advocate poll to 21 in the JMC Analytics in a poll by Signal, and then up to 33% by JMC Analytics for WVLA. I don't think it's that high. I think it's a little lower than that, but are these people going to vote? Usually they don't vote. Pollsters say you're lucky to get a third of them, but it's certainly large enough that if they do decide to vote, we could get a surprise on election day. I'm not totally expecting that, though.
We're already more than halfway through. Let me open it up to the floor. Since we have a small crowd, I think everybody here is press club members. It's open to everybody. So, Richard, we'll go ahead and take the first question.
Well, I know when Mary Landrieu lost, a lot of people wrote the obituary for the Democratic Party having statewide significance. Does this surprise you that something like John Bel Edwards is now actually a contender?
I'd be glad to respond to that. No, not at all. The Democrats may not be able to elect statewide officials, but they're certainly able to place them in the runoff. With a core of 32% of Louisiana citizens are African American, most of those African Americans are not, under any circumstance, can pull the lever for a Republican. Hence, the Democrats have always got a 40% bankable, 40% kind of turnout for a candidate. Does that mean they can win? No. Probably not. But the Democrats are not dead. There's damage to the point where they're now the determining factor, which is why Scott Angel and, Scott Angel and Jay Darden are trying so hard to get into the runoff, because if they get into the runoff, then Democrats have the balance of power, and Democrats are very much less likely to vote for Vitter than they are for one of those other 2 candidates. So I don't think they're not kingmakers, though. Well, they might be kingmakers, but they're not. Yeah.
So that means a possibility, even with what's happened the last few years. John Bel Edwards, it's conceivable he could win an election, or not. Goes a runoff.
Yeah,
between anybody, either.
Conceivably, but you really need a wounded Vitter, a Vitter that maybe was wounded. If there was some news, in my view, if there was some news scandal, or something new, or something that grabbed voters, or some issue, whether or not a Republican, most people are looking ahead and they're looking back at what he did to Charlie Melancon. They're looking ahead to John Bel Edwards, and they're saying the picture is not pretty, for the future in terms of John Bell's fate, and John Bell can try to spin it however he wants, and he has some things on his side, but I don't know.
Well, you gotta remember that our unique open primary system allows for a bit of election engineering, and that was attempted, to try to get another Democrat into the race. I've interviewed several candidates who were approached to try to get in, but when you got one Democrat and 3 Republicans carving up the same amount of the vote, I mean, it's unsurprising to see John Bel Edwards leading the primary. Now the runoff, we did learn something from the Mary Landry race, which is that her opposition did a very good job of condensing the talking points down to 3 things for low information voters. And those talking points were Obama, Obama, Obama. And the RGA, the Republican Governors Association, came in here at the last minute, dropped $1 million on TV, and that's what they're doing. I remember sitting in the WDSU debate, and John Bel Edwards got on stage and said, "I'm a Democrat, I support the president." And I leaned over to the person sitting next to me and I said, "That's going to be in an ad." And that's the ad that they released on Friday. And I think they're going to continue to hammer that. John Bel Edwards is like a piñata, jammed full of these white registered Democrats that traditionally vote Republican. And I think the Republicans are all sitting there with their sticks ready to whack away at him, hoping that they can pick up some of those white registered Democrats. But John Bel Edwards is not Mary Landry. He is a conservative. He's pro-life, pro-gun. He's got this one of the better stories of the entire election cycle, with his background at West Point and a family that's held a badge for several generations. So it's going to be more difficult, but that's where they're going to throw at him. That's what has worked in Louisiana for the past 7 years since a Democrat was elected statewide, and it's going to be a very tough narrative to go up against.
Going back to the point you made, Pearson, about Democrats not being kingmakers anymore, part of me thinks it's because the Democrats really haven't run much of anybody in a statewide election with name recognition or that had a chance to get elected since Kathleen Blanco. Of course, 2010 we had Mitch Landry as lieutenant governor in an interim race, but that aside, you look at other gubernatorial races. 2007 against Jindal was Walter Boisseau. 2011, does anybody remember who ran against Bobby Jindal?
Terry Hollis.
Terry Hollis. It surprised me there. I'm glad somebody remembered. There's nobody really of great name recognition or anyone who can consolidate the base. And is it partly because, the problem with the Democrats right now, is it partly their problem because they haven't had anyone, or because they haven't tried to run anyone with name recognition that could try to pull back some of the more conservative voters that the Democratic base used to have, or are there other problems causing?
It's about having a farm team or lack thereof. The springboard for the governor's seat has always been the commissioners of insurance, agriculture, secretary of state, treasurer, lieutenant governor, and so on. But if you got nobody in any of those positions, that means that, and you don't have one of the 2 U.S. senators, that means the best you can do is a congressperson. There's only one Democratic congressperson in Louisiana. He's African American from the 2nd District, obviously. So there's nobody of any stature who in an elected position, other than maybe a couple of mayors, who has any chance. And that's why people keep coming back to Mitch Landry. He's a Democrat, he's a mayor, I guess the biggest city in Louisiana is it still, and he's white, so they're kind of saying he's kind of the only hope for Democrats in this state, and he has shown no inclination to repeat his sister's fate in a statewide office. So the Democrats have worked themselves into this corner, and they're going to be there for a while until they start breaking through. And I don't think now's the time they're going to start doing it, frankly.
All right, we'll go back to the floor.
What about the other statewide offices? Lieutenant Governor, Secretary of State?
Lieutenant Governor, we're back to that open primary thing that McGinnis loved talking about, where we end up with the 2 extremes on the ideological spectrum, David Duke and Edwin Edwards, Cleo Fields, and Mike Foster, perhaps a John Bell versus a David Bitter. And so Kip Holden, Mayor of Baton Rouge, that lone Democrat, looks like he's in there. The question is, which elected Republican is going to make it in there with him? And I think Acadiana is going to come down as a swing region in that race. I think it's interesting to note that former Plaquemines Parish President Billy Nungasser, first thing he did when he left office was to move to Lafayette. His first statewide ad featured images of Breaux Bridge. His campaign headquarters is here. But John Young, meanwhile, the Jefferson Parish president, does decently well in the New Orleans media market. And if he can somehow capture lightning in a bottle and overperform there, he could hold his own. North Louisiana, it's a funny thing, you know, if you look at it collectively, they're pretty close. You know, there's region by region, one's leading the other, but both of them went ultra negative last week, almost on the same day. Their buys were placed at the same time, accusing each other of these sexual harassment claims that they may or may not have been involved with, which tells me I think that race is probably a lot tighter than some people may think for that number 2 spot. Attorney General, I think is, you know, I always thought this one was going to be the barn burner of the election cycle. I don't know quite what to expect on this one. The polls are all over the place, just like with every other statewide race. The polls have been really crazy, which is a whole other topic. But I think Attorney General will lead to a runoff. But we may see a surprise in that race, maybe. You know, they got some Democrats in that race. And Attorney General is a race that voters are used to seeing turnover in. I think more so than some of these other statewide races. But you have an incumbent who has gotten crossways with oil and gas, chemical, the legislature, the governor. Oil and gas and chemical really came out at the last minute for Jeff Landry. I thought they would be coming out earlier, but maybe they're waiting for the runoff to play heavily. But I don't know quite what to expect there.
Yeah, I don't know. These you mentioned the polls are all over the place. That's been one of the things that makes this race really odd. Is that you just doesn't seem like you can trust any of the polls, you know. And you'll get a poll and it'll kind of fit with what you kind of take as the consensus position. Then you get this other poll. It's like somebody will call. I don't know. You probably had that, or you know, and somebody will call you about a poll, but mention the numbers, and you go, really? I don't know what that's about. So I'm just not sure if it's the polling organizations or is the electorate so varied, you know, this year, or is it cell phones, or is it voter apathy, you know, that really the number of people who are going to vote, who are invested, is so low that catching any of them enough of them in a poll to make a difference is. I've been answering the phone. I have a landline still that I keep around specifically for political season, so every time it rings I rush to the phone so I can answer whatever the latest poll is to try to get some good numbers out there, but apparently I'm alone in that. You do that too, Claire? Yeah.
If it makes you feel better, I've got a landline too.
Okay, my wife has been lobbying to get rid of it.
Now, going back to Lieutenant Governor's race, you didn't mention Elbert Guillory, the current state senator who's also in the running there. Is he polling so low at this point that he's just an afterthought?
Yeah, it's a vanity campaign. You know, I think statewide when he flipped and he got all the press and he got the viral video that he thought people told him, you're going to be big, you're going to be a precedent breaker, you're going to be a Republican, you could have national aspirations, you know, this is going to work for you. And frankly, the sad demographic facts of Louisiana political life has weighed him down, and that is that blacks vote for blacks, whites vote for white, and if you're African American, even if you are a Republican, if you're not funded, and you're probably not going to get elected.
All right, I guess I saw Claire's hand up in the back of the room earlier.
Well, they kind of touched on it. I guess I was going to ask for, y'all both believe it'll be Vitter and John Bell Edwards in a runoff?
I think I said that the polling trends show that it could be.
And
I try to stay away from
and
predictions.
Vitter wins, if that's the case.
I try to stay away from predictions, but
I'm trying.
That's a smart move.
Let's talk about, since we have a lot of media here, we get some of these polls, what should we be looking for on how people conducted their polls? Because I know I've had a couple at my house where they didn't ask demographic information. They didn't ask if I was a homeowner or anything. They just said, we have a poll, and it was pretty, it was very odd.
I mean, that's the thing. You never know what you're getting. I mean, you can ask for crosstabs, but you don't know if it's just some guy putting numbers into a document to see if he can get you to run your poll, or, you know, it's tough out there right now. I mean, it's.
Is there, as a media, as a reporter,
Well,
anything we can do?
Well, the first thing I look at is whether it's automated or not. If it's automated, that means they can only call landlines. That cuts out a very large part of the electorate. Most respectable firms that are out to get an accurate sample are gonna do a mix of both, of live and automated. There are even some that are starting to mix in computer to computer. But you wanna definitely look at the demographics and see that the white and African American mix, the Republican versus Democrat mix is close to what you think the actual turnout is gonna be if they're likely voters. I mean, one of the things with these automated polls is it could be, you know, little cousin Susie, 7-year-old from Alaska, coming to see Mama down the bayou and taking the poll when she can't even vote here.
Yeah, I did that for my mom at St. Mary's Parish.
Yeah.
It was one of those ones, they didn't ask me anything.
But there's a national polling association that has some bullet points on their website that offers some good guidelines for polls. But of course, who paid for it? That's a very important question. We have at lapolitics.com, we have a listing of every poll dating back to December with data points graphed, and they're all supposedly independent polls, no super PAC, no candidates. That's kind of the stuff you gotta look at, I guess. Am I missing? I'm sure I am missing something.
Yeah, there are lots. You know, the size of the sample, you know, if you sample anything less, if you sample about 1,000 people, I think you get about a 3% plus or minus. Sample 2,000, you get a 2.3% plus or minus. So 600 gets you about a 5% plus or minus, somewhere in that area. Any less than that, you're really, you know. And then remember, polls are only right. They have a 95% accuracy rate, so they're right. They're right 95 out of every 100 polls they say will turn out the way they are. But then you have those 5 polls that are completely different, right? So there's no guarantee that yours isn't one of those, you know. That's what I've thought about with the way the polls have been fluctuating here in Louisiana, that maybe some of these polls we've hit some of those numbers.
And you're gonna wanna ask for the script too. You really want a poll that's gonna name the candidate by name and a party only. You know, there was a poll that was taken for a group of businessmen and a newspaper co-owner that recognized John Bel Edwards as a Catholic, but it didn't recognize the religion of any other candidate. Little things like that will jump out at you pretty quickly. And there, you know, there's a best practices of rotating the names in the poll. But definitely the script is something important to get a look at. And if there's polling likely voters also.
We're in the oddest of circumstances, just saying, generally speaking, where we have Louisiana, politics in Louisiana has always been just such a passionate endeavor for so many people. And now here it is, we have all these people going back to office without any kind of challenges. We have voter turnout, which has historically been high for the South, is now, you know, being low. I mean, there are all these things that are happening. They're just odd. They're almost un-Louisiana-like, you know.
It's very strange.
Yeah.
Strange.
Is there anything that can happen in the next week or even in the build-up to the runoff that could boost the voter turnout or kill the apathy?
Free money for voters.
Maybe that's it. Maybe now that there's not much street money, we're seeing a lack, right? You know, that's why people.
I mean, we're down. Well, I mean, we're gonna be counting this thing down by hours here pretty soon. I mean, I don't know if there's a whole lot to get people excited at this point if it hasn't happened yet.
Marie?
About Secretary of State's race. Do you see that Chris Tyson is making
I
ground?
think in a race like that, the power of incumbency is a very tough thing to overcome.
Yeah, there's not a scandal associated with Shedler, I don't think. So if there were, and you know, there might be some window, but without that, you know, in a race like this.
You know, Chris Tyson has turned out to be an impressive Democratic candidate in that. Go look at the fundraising for statewide Democratic candidates. I mean, they are, you know, scraping to raise money, and the reason is you really have to show donors a path to victory. And Chris Tyson has managed to find pockets of support outside the state in DC, Houston, Chicago, and it has raised some pretty serious money for a first-time candidate. It's probably not enough to compete effectively in a statewide race with someone like Tom Shetler, but for someone to run in his first race and really have to build his own structure, I mean, that's notable.
And Tyson's one of the candidates who's building on his networks. He's got degrees from Harvard, Georgetown. I forgot where he got his undergraduate degree, but another big brand name school, for lack of a better phrase. And he's young and he's capitalizing on all those opportunities. Plus, he's a professor at LSU Law, so you know he's got
Yeah.
connections there. And you said it, I didn't.
He's handsome.
But,
More than anything else.
But it would be, I would be disappointed if the Democrats didn't try to run him for something next year. Let's say a congressional race, run against Garrett Graves in Baton Rouge.
Mm.
I think he's got the belly to lose 2 races in a row. Tough. 6th district is in hospital.
I know folks have approached him about running for mayor in Baton Rouge. He's focused on the Secretary of State's race, as he told me. Yeah.
Let's go ahead and jump local for a second, Pearson. I'll let you take this one with the city parish president's race and with the sheriff's race. I'll lump them into one because we've seen lately anyway with certain camps more negative advertising, more mudslinging, more attacking. And for those who are in the know who follow politics, most of it's coming from one particular campaign manager who has his hands in a couple of different races. Talk about the negative campaigning here in Lafayette, what you see, what kind of difference you see it's making on the race, and what your predictions or what your outlook for the local races for Lafayette Sheriff, Lafayette Parish President, what's your take on that?
Well, you know, there's always kind of negative campaigning, but in terms of the sheriff's race, I mean, I've been a little surprised at the you know, it seems like Pope, the marshals, got involved in some of it. I was just surprised that he would leave the bounds, the jurisdictional bounds of the marshal's office to get involved in a sheriff's race. That seemed odd to me, frankly. So it made me wonder what's going on. As far as the fundamentals of the race, though, I don't think any of these negative ads are going to affect the fundamentals of the race. You know, fundamentals like in the parish president's race, where you have 2 well-liked white Republicans who both have good records, who are running for a position, and I think in this particular case, I think they're going to split the white vote in this parish, and I think it's going to come down to African Americans to decide the city parish president's race. So in this particular case, I think African Americans in Lafayette Parish make up about 23% of the population, I think, and I think they're going to be the deciding vote. And so I've heard that Joel Robideau, who perhaps started out a little behind there, has been making inroads, connecting with a number of people, and is coming on in that community. And I don't know for sure, but I think that's where the balance of power lies in that race. In the other race, with 4 quality candidates, I still think that polling suggests that Lachey and Garber are the candidates that are ahead, and I don't think personal stuff that's come out is going to change the shape of that right now. There was quite a bit of early negativity regarding Charbois, and you know, Rogers, I think, seems like a adequate candidate. I've been very impressed with all 4 of those candidates in the forums that I've done with them. But so I guess bottom line, I don't think the negative campaigning is going to. When you have a low information, apathetic voter electorate, negative campaigning doesn't necessarily cut through. Because it's not getting through to people. That's not going to be the thing.
Questions from the floor? We'll go back to the floor.
I'd just say maybe related to city parish president's race, a lot of the obvious negative stuff has come from the Louisiana Victory Fund, which is a PAC recently formed. And I wonder if you've seen, maybe for Jeremy, like a PAC getting involved in such a local election, because in Lafayette it's not that common. It was kind of unusual when I saw, like, who's doing this ad?
There's a
Louisiana Victory Fund, and
well, there's a second super PAC that's going to get involved with independent expenditures in the mayor's race this week.
yeah.
That we'll be reporting on in the Politics Weekly for subscribers on Thursday. So there's a lot of folks, a little plug.
Hey, we appreciate plugs.
I got kids. All right.
I think so the last time-
These races are, these Lafayette races are being watched by people around the state. There's a lot of interest in these races. A lot of folks are banking their GOTV on the back of these races. There's been a lot of money. I'm sure if anybody's watching TV right now, y'all have got to be sick of it. It's got to be back to back.
Every commercial this
when I go
morning,
through the
Acadiana was a political ad.
when I go through the flights these last couple of weeks, I've been amazed by how much money's going into Lafayette. I think there's, the outside money coming into these races, local races, it's a growing trend.
Is that, state, I'm more familiar here, I just haven't seen it a lot in recent cycles, not that there's been a lot of.
Yeah, you're talking about for local races?
Yes, local races.
Yeah, that's why I think it's slowly
And
starting to.
the city parish president also saw the other one, Page Cortez's group, gave, I forget, I looked, it was a pretty substantial amount of money to Robideau, which is odd, because he also had a contributor to that PAC, but it also, one of his biggest contributors also been giving money to Stanley.
That's quite common to
Yeah.
see folks kind of hedging their bets
Yeah.
with candidates. But 4 years ago, who would have ever thought that all that money would have been dumped into basket races? And now look at the basket race of this cycle. There's a super PAC that turned a Supreme Court race here a few years ago. It's slowly making its way down, and I wouldn't be surprised to see super PACs playing in legislative races next cycle. Although we do see some of it now with that tort reform group that Boise Bollinger's involved with, and a few other examples.
Why though? Why are they getting involved in such a local?
Well, a donor used to have to kind of nickel and dime their influence for candidates. They'd have to go and get their wife to donate and go through different business structures and kind of bundle a bunch of donations and hand that over and really have to work within the campaign structure. But now with a super PAC, they can write one check and really kind of control what kind of input they have in the race. And this is something that's very worrisome to the political parties, because the political parties often played that independent expenditure role, and now they're suing in court to have the ability to raise unlimited amounts of money for independent expenditures, just like super PACs have that ability. It's really, Pearson said that he sees the turning point a few races ago, and I have to disagree that it's this race because of that factor alone.
Yeah, well, I would agree in that regard.
Any more questions?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Craig.
Y'all have said, I think Mr. Alford said, Acadiana may be a turning, the swing vote in the governor's race?
Lieutenant Governor.
Lieutenant governor's, why is that?
Because you have two men from southeast Louisiana that are battling over the same vote. North Louisiana, if you look at it collectively, they're running pretty close. If you look at it region by region or in the crosstabs, you see more of a difference. But it's really going to come down to Acadiana because the voter turnout is probably going to be a little bit higher than the statewide average. And also, it's traditionally a voter-rich area for Republicans, especially Lafayette at the heart of Acadiana. And plus, the campaigns have told me that, or rather, they agree.
I have a question, and that is, why is Nungesser having so much problem this time around? He got beat last time around, I think it was 53-47, right? So if you make 47% of the total in a state, and then you come back 4 years later without an incumbent, and everybody knows your name from the first race, why aren't you just walking away with this race? Has something changed about?
Yeah, there's an African American Democrat in the race that kind of took some of that earlier vote from Nungesser, and also he's been behind on TV. John Young was able to get up early and stay on nonstop.
But nobody's heard of John Young. You would think that the reverberations of Nungesser would still be there. It just seems odd that it'd be so competitive.
And the John Young running for lieutenant governor, not to be confused with John R. Young, the car dealer in Eunice. We have just a few minutes left, so we'll go ahead. We'll ask you gentlemen for your final thoughts, and we'll take it from there. We'll go ahead and start with Dr. Cross.
Well, final thoughts about this race. You can't have final thoughts about a race in Louisiana because it's going to be a new deck of cards come runoff time, right?
Does that mean you'll come back and talk to us next month?
No. After this experience, are you kidding? I'm just curious looking down the road. I mean, at some point, are the candidates, as we refine, particularly with the governor's race, are we going to have to get more specific about what we're going to do about the budget? I mean, right now, everybody's hedging their bets, and we haven't heard any solid kind of proposals. I mean, really, nobody's really put it on paper or made any kind of, other than, yeah, we're all gonna call a special session, we're all gonna address this, we're not gonna kick the can down the road, but that's it, it's also general. So I'm wondering if in this next go around, we're still gonna hear more of that, because it is so unsatisfying in the face of these staggering deficits and the state kind of careening out of control and everything else, to just be kind of like, well, you just have to vote for somebody on the basis of who you think's the better person, not the basis of any actual concrete proposals. So I guess that's the big suspense after the initial round, is to find out.
Yeah, I don't know what else there is left to say, but I will say this, that Mike Foster, Buddy Romer, and Edwin Edwards all ended up in heaven on the same day, standing before the pearly gates. And St. Peter said, wow, this is exciting. 3 Louisiana governors at the same time. The only bad thing is I can't get the gate to open. So Buddy Romer said, well, I used to do some contracting back in my day. Let me go check it out. So Buddy Romer goes over and measures the gate, spends about an hour, comes back with a stack of paperwork, gives it to St. Peter, and says, hey, I can fix it for $1,000. I'm going to save you money, and I'll get it done in just a day. So Mike Foster says, I kind of used to do this. So Mike Foster goes over to the gate, gives it a kick, and walks back and tells St. Peter, I'll get the gate open and working for $2,000. St. Peter said, well, that's $1,000 more than Romer would. Foster said, look, you get what you pay for. So by this time, Edwin Edwards figures out what's going on and kind of wants to get a piece of it. So he goes and walks over to the gate and barely looks at it, comes back to St. Peter and said, I'll fix it for $3,000. St. Peter said, 3,000, that's 2,000 more than Romer, it's 1,000 more than Foster. What's the deal? Edwards looks over his shoulders and says, 1,000 for you, 1,000 for me, and we sub it out to Romer. That's my closing.
And with that, thank you, gentlemen. We appreciate it. Jeremy Alford, Dr. Pearson Cross, thank you. Now, for those of you who are wondering what are we doing next month, to be quite honest with you, I have no idea. It's dependent on a couple of things. We may have a runoff debate in here, maybe for Lafayette Parish Sheriff, maybe for another office. We're not sure. We're going to play that by ear. Stay tuned. We'll have more information on that. The other bit of housekeeping that we need to do is with regards to memberships and elections for the Acadiana Press Club. If you want to become a member of the Press Club, we're going to start opening, well, you can register now. We'll take your membership fee gladly. But the next year for memberships and for officer nominations will begin on January the 1st. So in January, we'll begin taking new memberships for the upcoming year, and your membership will run you from January through December, as opposed to the July through June model that we had done up to this year. So for those of you who paid for last year, you're still good through December. But again, January through December, starting next year, you'll pay your memberships, and we'll do board elections either in January or February, somewhere in there. So please do keep that in mind. Of course, we're online, we're on Facebook, you can find us there, and of course, Ed Bowie with AOC, kind enough to record us. You can find us on AOC's YouTube channel as well. And for those of you watching on AOC, stay tuned for more great programming. Until next month, take care. Thank you.
The preceding program was made possible in part with production assistance provided by AOC Community Media.